Thank you for coming today. I'm going to attempt to eulogize a smile. And you should be thankful that at first I didn't think I'd be strong enough to do this, so I was going to have my husband do it. And at his dad's funeral, his eulogy was over an hour, so let's start by being thankful. Oh, that song was a little harder than I was planning on. I'm going to show you what amazing love can do to a person. So I asked people for some help a couple of days ago when my own life fell apart. I said, I need you to help me write down some of the stories of my mom. So I put out a Google Doc and I asked people, share a memory. What do you think of when you hear Rose Bosworth? And even though these pews are empty because of the times we live in, this collection of stories is my mom. And it's going to start with some of the easier stories for me to tell you about through her community, through her role as a sister and leader of women. And then it's going to get to the hardest ones, which were from the last season of her life. So, my mother was born into a community. She was one of 8 children, and there was an instant community in her home. From the oldest sibling to the youngest sibling spans 21 years, and my mother was right in the middle. She was in the middle of a storm. The 2 of her sisters, while adding to the document, simultaneously described her as a tornado. She was a force of nature. I imagine a tornado constantly swirling with Rose grounded in the center. She could organize and plan and carry out an event before the rest of us could even plot out the problem. Being on a committee with Rose was like being in the wake of a commander-in-chief. She only gave you so much time to fart around before she would stop talking about the problem and remind you that committees don't get things done, people do. Let's get started. You never had to wonder when that moment arrived if you were on that committee. She would carefully observe, let you try and lead, but if you failed, she showed up with all of the tornado swirling around her. And when she said yes to being on a board or a committee, she didn't just dabble in this role. She took it on as if it was part of her person, her children, like the project was alive, and it became her identity, even when the projects were little. This was a theme that goes through these stories on that document. For 50 years, she served in the Order of the Eastern Star. This is an organization of strong, faith-led women. Each year, she embraced her faith by learning a part in the ceremony that it was inspired by strong women of faith. The process over the 50 years gives you the opportunity to memorize and truly understand what it looks like to be a strong, faith-based woman. Not just by reading those Bible verses, but you really understood the history behind these women. Over the 50 years, I looked at her resume and was not shocked to see that one of her most repeated roles was the role of Electra, which was the woman in red, one of her favorite colors, but more importantly was the woman who seemed to grow God's grace and power if you were being persecuted or in a moment of adversity. And that represents my mother. She was a woman who not only wore red, but if the times were swirling with the tornado, It's like the power from that tornado was channeled through her and her smiles. The title of this, I didn't say at the beginning, was What Makes Rose Smile? So even though the adversity would happen and the tornado was swirling around her, you will see in those stories, if you get an opportunity to look at that document, that every one of them talks about this infectious smile that would flow into the person receiving that smile. Supporting women wasn't just this quaint activity that she did behind closed doors in a secret society. Although she smiled with pride every time she performed her role in that women's society, it was a bigger smile when she was teaching young women. The local second grade teacher shared, "I will miss your mom, but I will mostly miss what she did with the young girls and that she mentored in my classroom. She didn't just come into the class and sit and read with them. She loved them. She sent her smile to awaken them." She developed great relationships with the students. One of the groups of girls read Laura Ingalls Wilder, the chapter book. Rose would stop them from reading and explain exactly what these people did that lived in the time. She would add the story and her own personal energy. When there were days when Mom's health got poor and she couldn't come to those Wednesdays, the girls were so sad because this was the highest moment of their week with the energy coming from Rose's smiles. Another mother in the community wrote, "A number of years ago, I inherited my grandmother's sewing machine. Although sewing machines must skip a generation since my mom had no idea how to run it, I really wanted to teach my girls, but I didn't know much about a sewing machine either. So who better to call than Marie Bosworth? She helps me get things set up, and one Sunday morning, I'm particularly frustrated with how my sewing machine has broken. So after church, she drives out to the farm to show me what was wrong with my sewing machine. She sat in front of the sewing machine and a huge smile swept across her face. Oh, sweetie, you simply have threaded it wrong." She helped my girls make their first 4-H sewing projects, and every time I see them sew, I think of the love Rose gave. She gave them that with her smile. At the age of 22, in 1994, I helped my mother run for county auditor. She knocked on every door in Aurora County and asked for their vote. She didn't get the list of just Republicans or Democrats. She needed everyone to know. Her slogan was, "Rose knows the auditor's office." And she said it with a smile that made you want to vote with her. As we did this, traveling around Aurora County, we sang all kinds of patriot songs like "Glory, Glory, Hallelujah" and "Yankee Doodle Dandy." And we smiled and we laughed and we made up the words when we didn't know what the words were, because that's just what she did. It wasn't a moment about being perfect. It was a moment about showing up, using a talent that God's given you, and adding the smile. She knew once she got elected, she knew that selecting her deputy would be one of her understudies as the women in the community that she would mentor. This was not a little decision for her. She spent so much time praying about this and thinking about how can I find someone and make sure that they grow into the role of a strong woman. The woman she picked lived up to all of Mom's dreams. A smart, strong woman whose faith flows through her and her community as she smiles in the courthouse today. Another community work for my mother was the local Blessings Repeated thrift store. Her work there offers, the thrift store offers one of the latest seasons of service for my mom. At age 72, she started another tornado. This project was the local mission work to help those in need in her own community. She found great joy in being able to help the customer find what they needed and made sure that they were able to afford it. She made it a point to bring her grandkids to blessings and witness what service in the community looks like. Prescott, her oldest son, said, "One time I was helping fill a bag at the cash register, and it was $5 Friday. For $5, you get to keep all the clothes that were inside the bag. She scolded me right in front of the customer because I didn't fill it full enough. And she was showing me how to do that, and she smiled the whole way through." Another place of many stories on that document was her role as a sister or an aunt. Her oldest sister, Mary Jane, said, "Rose, I admired the strength and your get-it-done frame of mind. When the time came to move our mother into an alternate living environment, we had to downsize a house full of memories. Our brother John and I were attempting to convince Mother that certain things could possibly be discarded, and time was getting short on completing the task. Enters Tornado Rose. Things moved and they got done on record time. Rose, you were always my hero." Her organizational force of nature didn't stop at her community. Her family saw firsthand how quickly and effortlessly she would set up family events. I saw her do this many times, and from my point of view, this is how all mothers would set up family gatherings. Instead of polling the family and finding the perfect date and time, she would pick the date and make it so stinking fun that if you missed it, you felt the pain of not being there. She wove so much fun into the adventures of family gatherings that you would lose a job as opposed to missing one of these events. She didn't count heads and make sure that everybody had a bed and everybody had a place to sleep, because she said, well, that leaves no room for the adventure. So there were not enough showers, and there was not enough food, and there was plenty of food actually. There was not enough beds, but suddenly there was a blanket fort in the basement with a kitchenette, because we were the girls. There was a tent out in the front yard, where I think the adults wanted to sleep because it was quieter than the house. She would find cozy ways to make everybody welcome. She often told me, "Don't focus on the details, you'll never get started." And I think that message flowed throughout her life. One of the cousins wrote in, Aunt Rose was in charge of the talent show at every gathering. On the Bosworth side of the family, her sister-in-law wrote, after Easter service, the kids would grab their Easter baskets and hunt Easter eggs on the farm. At Christmas, Santa would come and visit and hand out the gifts personally. The kids were very excited. One year, we even had a real live Rudolph show up. Rose was always in charge of the talent show for the holidays, and she made sure every kid had something to do. Even the ones lacking courage or not sure they had a talent, she would accept no excuses. Even if you got up there and sang, "Mary Had a Little Lamb," she would cheer for you and she would smile, because it was the courage that she was most proud of. On the Kritzmire side of things, her nephew Eric said, Rose would encourage anyone, to have a good time and make things fun. She was good at making things with her hands, and her voice was made to sing. When I was younger, I sometimes thought she was as good as Dolly Parton. And she dressed like a cowgirl, too. Her smile was just as pretty. Tracy, my niece, her niece, my cousin, shared my fondest childhood memories were on the Bosworth farm. I remember them sliding down the basement deck stairs in the sleeping bags, trying to get the go-kart started, turned into my first mechanics lessons, setting up huge canvas tents, and while my dad was cussing, there was camping going on in the front yard. Family reunions and the variety shows and skits. And Aunt Rose as Dolly Parton, she does have a picture of this. The phrase, zucchini not the weenie, comes to mind. And then Cousin Jessie singing, where is my hat? To this day, I cannot hear the song King of the Road and not have a flashback to the family farm. As the nieces and nephews grew up, she treated them more like her own children. She was careful to make sure that she knew all of their families, what they were doing, and when she asked about your family, it wasn't a pleasantry. She genuinely wanted to know. She was also very careful to make up for any shortcomings that the other aunties might have in their mothering skills. One of those was my Aunt Carol Ann is a very strict Catholic and has several daughters. So she made sure that on the wedding day of Tracy, and the other ones, but Tracy's was most memorable to me, that she left out no details when sharing that one of the key parts to a healthy marriage is a healthy vagina. My cousin Tracy continues to be thankful for that conversation to this day. One of her favorite nephews, Dan Bosworth, wrote this. Aunt Rose always wanted to know how Bailey and little Al were. Adoption and fostering are part of their lives, and it has lots of ups and downs. Raising kids with fostering can be very emotional, and people like hearing the good parts. But Aunt Rose genuinely wanted to know about the up and the down. She always encouraged my wife and I to keep doing what we were doing with those foster kids. Dan, you don't know how much you are changing their life. Dan shared she knew how long we had Alfred and kept praying for us that we would be able to keep him. And about the time she entered the hospital, we got guardianship of little Al. I didn't get to tell her that news, but I know her prayers were part of that miracle. Thanks, Aunt Rose. My perspective of Rose Bosworth as the daughter is a little warped from reality. I thought every family had treasure hunts, specific mother-daughter discussions about the J-Days, and talent shows at every turn. At 21 years old, I brought my two best friends home from college, from USD, and to spend the weekend at the magical place called the farm. We had driven from Vermilion, and we just hit the gravel road leaving Plankinton before the curve. And on the radio comes Puff the Magic Dragon. I blast the radio and sing the song with my whole heart. And at first, my friends were singing with me, but then they trailed off and started laughing. And I said, what? And they said, how do you know all the words to Puff the Magic Dragon? And I'm like, well, didn't your mother sing that to you when you were a kid? Those moments happened repeatedly in the shower of Rose Bosworth's smile. It only took a weekend of with my mother for my friends to be hypnotized by her goodness. Meeting your mother explains so much about you. Her role as a wife, I'll be honest, Dad did not know who he was asking to marry him when he asked. He had no idea what it was like to marry a strong, baby-faced tornado of a woman. I will say that he married up. She was so happy to be part of Dad's family. I can remember her talking about how wonderful it was to have running water, hot water, a flushable toilet inside. But the best smile that you see in the pictures and the history of my mom is when she danced with my dad. They met on a dance floor, and there were lots of other pretty women that could have been the chosen one. But I bet it was her smile that caught his heart. Dancing with my dad. The smile from that Milltown experience was something they talked about and threaded through their life. They danced for 50 years. Even with knee replacements, Dad's smile wasn't quite as big after the knee replacements, but the energy was there. Dad did marry a strong woman, and I think that role is what resonates when I read these stories of all the strong women that she encouraged. Because you have this really strong, tall, dark, and handsome farmer coming from a very strong family, which she loved being a part of. But you add a strong woman to that, and there's some clashes. She shared stories of the early life of being married and how other strong women came into her life and guided her. They said the unspoken rules that happen when a strong woman gets married. She had her mother-in-law, my grandma Gladys Bosworth, who put a whole new framework to the term strong woman. Gladys taught my mom how to be a farmer's wife. She drew great pride in figuring out and learning these things about how to castrate pigs and cut chickens' heads off. That's not a figurative way of living. They did that. She learned to pray for rain and to pray for it to stop. She learned how to pack the lunches. And she got some tips that was really important to deliver those lunches in person, in the field. Some of the couple's funnest moments, apparently. My strong mother also wanted me to emulate some of these. And she said one day, apparently it's pretty hard to be married to people like us. Women who live in the center of a tornado can be a bit tough on a guy. But she learned how to work together with Dad. She would constantly say, when you're married, part of the role is to help them look better. And I don't think there's a better example of how she did that than the furniture they made. Because as lovely as the furniture was, she worked with him and then upholstered it in a way that you could actually sit on it. She could do anything, not just because she was the best, but because she was not afraid to try. She would do things like butchering chickens, and she had a song to go with it. Picking rock had another song to go with that. If she gave you a haircut, which she did all of us, or a perm, she'd read the directions and say, it can't be that tough. And she'd just do it. After Dad died, there was a list of things that she had never touched. These were his jobs, not hers. But that changed. About a month after Dad's funeral, I head out to the farm, and I've got some slave labor with me. The kids are trying to help Grandma get a rut out of the front yard. And the rut is made of clay, so it's really hard. And of course, we don't acknowledge that this is difficult. We're going to take you the next 14 hours to do. Just say, no, take the pick and go do it. But about an hour into it, she goes, let me show you what I learned how to do. And she got this smile where I knew it was either going to be dangerous or illegal. So she heads out to the barn, and she crawls up in the skid loader. And if you've not driven the skid loader, there's not a steering wheel. There's these things you do with your feet, and then your legs, and something with your knee, and then your body does something in your hand. It's like a robot. And I am looking at her like, No. And this smile comes out of the shed, driving the skid loader. I'm like, Mother, where did you learn to drive a skid loader? I YouTubed it. Another one of those untouchables was, you can't live on a farm without critters. This was Dad's job. Again, about a month into living alone, she has mastered how to kill the animals inside the trap. She, however, refuses to remove them from the traps and calls Aaron, one of the family friends, to say, I've got another one. He's stinky. Hurry up. One day I said, Mom, the girls at college would call it sexist to put so much energy into helping your husband look better. And she looks at me, she says, I've been to that chapter. Keep watching. Really strong women, especially those who draw energy from the Lord, have enough goodness to make both of you look good. They don't get that energy from themselves. These women that see it as sexist keep track of their lives. There's a component they're missing. I kept that in mind throughout the years. I thanked Mom for this lesson because there's no other woman that taught me this. So I got another peek into keeping a healthy marriage. This was about 10 years into about 10 months into my own marriage. My husband had moved out to where I was living, and I was in residency, so kind of busy, but when I got up, it was of course understood that he was going to get up. And if he wasn't up, well, I got him up just like my mother did. Rise and shine and give God your glory, glory. And I would just keep singing until he got up. And every time I sing that song, this smile shows up on my face. Again, her smile delivered that. And my husband said it took 12 years for him to teach me not to do that. Her friends got another look at her smiles. We've covered the ones from the community and her sisters and brothers, some nieces and nephews, but her friends got a lot of her smiles. She and Dad would go to the golf course, and her friends would say, if we got to the golf course and we wondered if Rose was there, you just had to stand still for a minute, because eventually she'd laugh, and you could hear it all the way across the course. There were some traditions that she used to practice her laugh. Cards were one of them. Friendships throughout the community played cards with her. Grandkids learned that cards were a form of this entertainment that took years for them to really realize they were practicing that. She said, you don't ever want to tell them that. It's just more fun when they don't realize they're learning. New Year's at all Rex and the art and deliverance of Rocky Mountain oysters couldn't go unmentioned. Super Bowls were something that I remember the first year, as do most people, because Mom and Dad were running late, and she didn't like that, so she was irritated. I'm sure I could hear the conversation on the way to the event, but she burst through the All Rex door for the Super Bowl and says, have we missed the cock-off? And again, for 40 years, they teased her about that. America's Got Talent Tuesdays, again, are a place where the memories and the smile showed up every week. But when it comes to being Rose Bosworth's friend, there's 3 rules that show up to say, did you make the inner circle? Were you the higher echelon of a friend? So you knew you were a higher echelon of friend if you'd done a service project with her. For 50 years, she was in one organization, and then chose not to be part of that organization. It wasn't until this funeral that I realized that she didn't just stop being part of a community service organization, like not court ordered or anything. This is just voluntary. It was that very next year that she joined another one. Of course she did. Service projects were about how she used her smile. She was a seamstress, so if you are a really good friend, she sewed something for you. Whether it was a flower girl dress or trimming a dress to look at, to fit a wedding, or helping you make costumes for the play, or helping with puppets here at the church. She used that skill of sewing. As my sister and I were doing a very unpleasant event of trying to find an outfit to wear to your mother's funeral, we both said, well, Mother would say, and at the same time, wear a well-tailored garment. This did bring a smile when she saw you dressed right and that it fit. She could smile. If you showed up and that hemline was too long, she'd get you naked and go sew it. Another seamstress place was every child ended up with clothes from Grandma Rose. As her primary children, or grandchild, I have to say. As her primary children, we were kind of tired of them. I remember rivets on my jeans at age 10 years old. That was the first time. But there was a particular picture where she wanted everybody dressed for a picture, and she had got the softest blue velvet to make all these sailor outfits out of. And by golly, it was her passion for a good 6 months that everybody had it, and we were going to be there for the picture, and they were going to wear this. But it happened to be a time when my son, my youngest son, was 4. At 4 years old, a blue velvet sailor suit might be the highest currency possible. He wore that as well as a blue sailor's outfit for his little Johnny. Little Johnny was the doll character that my Grandma Gladys used to say, this is how you teach the youngest, that they have a responsibility here. So you got to make sure at least the youngest kid has a little Johnny to teach the lessons to, or they don't turn out right. Grandma Gladys had a lot of wisdom that way, but little Johnny wore his sailor outfit every day. The little Johnnies didn't need to be washed. But Chancellor's did. He wore it 6 out of 7 days for a year. At preschool, he was known as the kid in the sailor suit. But finally, if you wanted to make the highest level of friendship with my mother, pardon my language, but she would call you asshole. And this was a strange ritual that I had never seen while growing up. But I come home and this friend, Judy Harris, and her meet, and the first thing they do is howl at each other with this strange word. What are you saying, Mom? And a few years ago, Judy died. And the transference of this lovely, endearing term passed on to my husband. Because if you really wanted to know if Rose Bosworth loved you, yes, the smile got you some currency. But if she argued with you, and if she ever got engaged enough to call you that, you were in forever. Which leads me to her favorite role. Her role as grandmother. Grandkids wove through every thought in her mind since they were born. From service work to playing cards, to education, to politics, she thought of her grandkids first. Jace, the youngest grandchild, added a story. His favorite memory, Grandma Rose sewed me a brand new blanket. It had blue satin on one side, and the other side had yellow ducks. She also made me and my dad a story to go with the blanket. She sent it to my dad, and my dad read her handwritten story, and I'd fall asleep when that story was over. While at Grandma's house, she would make going to bed fun. And she was going to bed on the floor. We were going to bed on the floor. But it wasn't really the floor. It was the nest. What kid wouldn't want to go to sleep in Grandma's nest? Grandma Rose was the best person I've ever met. Since elementary school, the farm, Walker also says, since elementary school, the farm felt like this mythical paradise, separated from the everyday rush and stress of reality. Starting in the summers of my second grade year, Grandma Rose came up with this brilliant idea to have only one grandkid there for 2 weeks. So Prescott, Chancellor, and I would get our own 2 weeks alone with Grandma Rose. These were always the most magical weeks of the summer because you got your own devoted smile. Alone time with Grandma. You got to unwind and have her full attention. Looking back, there's no reason these were super special. They were just time with Grandma. If you were to write the list of things I did, they looked and sounded like chores for a 1960s housewife. I would start the morning in the garden and go to the kitchen and do some baking, play some cards, and end the day with some knitting. During these weeks every summer, you felt the center of the universe. You were in the center of that tornado with her. All the grandkids, you know, she could see your gifts before you could see them. She had this way of knowing that God's gift was there. And it was her purpose to point it out. What was that? Prescott, as her first grandkid, she poured love into you. The first day she saw your talent, you were 4. You'd been at the farm, and she called me to say, he takes these adventures and then comes back in the house talking so fast I can't quite tell what he's saying, but he is sure happy to tell me. You make sure he takes adventures. Ryan, you need to know that it was Grandma who insisted on that monstrosity of a computer that we bought you a couple months ago. Give him the tools. He will be great. He loves it. But he can't learn unless we give him the tool. So every time you use that computer, know your grandma saw your talent. Madison and Caitlin, you've got a legacy to live up to. A strong woman of faith. She could not talk about either of you without infusing her dream of a woman that can change the world. Peggy and I know exactly how that feels. And although it can feel like a heavy responsibility, don't worry. We'll have that the JJ talk with you on your wedding day, and we'll show you our example. Joseph, she loved your grit. She screamed, swim like a bandit, because she knew your intelligence blended with your desire to win was your gift. Walker, in the 3rd grade, she called me to say he could be president. Last year, after watching your debate, she called me afterwards and said, remember how I said he could be president? She loved the way you studied and the way you perfected that skill. Chancellor, there isn't a wrestling match that goes by that she didn't whisper into my ear, don't ever let him forget that it's his fight that's his talent. None of your other boys come close. It's that fight in him. And Jace, both Grandma and Grandpa, shared countless times he needs a puzzle to solve. As soon as I needed a puzzle, he was engaged for hours. And now the hardest story is my mother. I will do a good job here because she, for 50 years almost, poured her smile onto this woman. My greatest memory of my mom is because she knew my talent. And even when I couldn't see it, she was right there to kick me out of the ditch and help me see my talent. I was 22, and I was very stressed that if I didn't do well on this test, I couldn't go to medical school. I didn't know what I was going to do if I didn't do that. Everybody that was in my head told me I couldn't do it. You're just a farm kid. You've got one B. So she knew that I was studying because I hadn't called in almost 3 weeks. And the test counted down. The test is like 8 hours long, probably only 4, but in my mind it was 8 hours long. And I didn't have any life planned after this test. It was so important to me. And she shows up in Vermilion, unannounced, and I walk out of this test. And this smile hits me. And I just cry. Like, oh. She said, let's go. We went to a hotel room in Vermilion. But it was time with that smile. And that night, the conversation with my mother. Mom, where did it come from? Where did what come from? This energy. I feel it when you're around me. I thought every mother had it. That's not true. Her reply wove wisdom with playfulness and avoided anything condescending when she said, well, God, of course. Well, why doesn't every faithful person have it then? It gets stuck. It gets stuck in their soul. Mine used to too. How'd you break free? A broken heart? A little confused, I said, by what? A bad boyfriend or something? No. You were too. My heart broke wide open when my baby died. After those words, I had flashes of memories where I would answer the question when someone would ask me how many kids are in your family, and I would say 3. And these kind words would come over my shoulder and say, no, honey, there's 4. She continued her story. After he died, Jesse couldn't come home into my arms. And I knew that the pain would never reverse. It changed me. I didn't like this conversation. Mom, how does this lead to anything good? I was so mad at God. I was angry and sad, and it lasted for weeks. And your dad tried to help me. He helped me. He cried with me. He prayed with me. But nothing helped. The sadness and the bitterness grew. About 3 months into the darkness, something deep in my soul spoke. You have a choice. Faith will restore the goodness in you. Anger will deny you that gift. I started to cry when those words came through my soul. It was just easier to be upset with God and hurt. Choosing the Lord was hard. I was so deep into the sadness. Over the next several hours, I made the choice to let go. I let go and everything changed. Goodness used to come into my life, and I would flaunt that I had this great life. I would almost show off, look how great my life is. But after the pain, it stopped getting stuck in my soul. The energy that God gifted me started flowing to other people. It left my body and entered the souls of the people I cared for. She needed to accept the gift. It was a real choice, and she'd mentioned this a couple of times in her life when I would get stuck. You have a choice. And the strength that comes out of a tornado is a gift from God. Most of us get torn up in the tornado. This final season of her life was a time where she had given this gift to other people. and the responsibility of being 3 children from this angel who keeps pouring love through her soul on you and forgiving you and guiding you, it was time for that to change. No one tells you this is going to happen, but in 2012, Grandma's light went out for the 3rd time in her life. It had left in the grieving moments from her father's death. It had left in the grieving moments of her son. But in 2012, Grandma's magic was gone. And she was sick, and she was ready to die. And the magic of Mary Poppins was something I got to use to help her. My husband has said many times, your mother is proof that God loves me. Experiencing you in her shows me what it's like to smile during your storm. The receipt of the love that she gave to me for 50 years, I poured back into her. And the best part about my mom's death is it wasn't a dwindled death of no life and no magic. Her resurrection of Mary Poppins, the joy she had in serving, and the smiles she spent pouring into other people the last 5 years, is the gift that will get me through this. Mom, we got this. I'll be your tornado.